How much are you worth?
I have no idea. How much do you want?
No, I just want to know what you're worth. Over 10 million?
Oh, my, yes.
Why are you doing it? How much better can you eat? What can you buy that you can't already afford?
The future, Mr. Gitz. The future.
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you're enjoying it so far. Have you noticed how every episode starts with a movie clip that has something to do with money? What you just heard is from one of the most acclaimed films of all time, Chinatown, with Jack Nicholson. And I figured it was appropriate to have something from a classic movie like that for my guest today, Nell Minow. Nell leads two very different professional lives. She's a film critic known as the Movie Mom. She's also an attorney and one of the leading experts in America when it comes to corporate governance. Few people have fought as publicly on behalf of individual shareholders like you and me over the past 3 decades plus as much as Nell Minow has. And we had a great chat. I've interviewed Nell a couple dozen times over the past 15 years, but there are things that came out in this conversation that I was completely unaware of. So let's get into it with Nell Minow. What memories of money do you have growing up?
Well, I genuinely remember my father explaining the value of coins to me and saying, now the dime is smaller, but it's worth twice as much. I mean, I remember that very well. And I remember my discussion with my dad about an allowance. I had never heard the word allowance, and one of my friends told me that she got one. And I said to my dad, I think I should have an allowance. And I was about, I would say, 7 or 8 years old. And he said, okay. He said, I'm going to give you 15 cents a week, 5 cents to spend, 5 cents to save, 5 cents to give to charity. And that has stayed with me all my life. I think that was a great way to begin to think about money.
I can understand that's how you feel now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, did you think, wait a minute, no. My friend, because I'm guessing your friend probably just got an allowance and got to do whatever she wanted with it.
Yeah, that may be, but that made a lot of sense to me. And I thought that was great. You know, I went to Sunday school every week at our synagogue, and they would collect money for charity and tzedakah, which means both charity and justice in Hebrew. And so I knew that I was going to be expected to do that. And the idea of saving it and then maybe saving for something later on was good too. Then a few years later, there was an ad on TV for a doll that I wanted very, very much. And let me tell you how cool this doll was. She was so cool, she was manufactured for 1 year and then went off the market. You can still find her on eBay. So this doll was incredibly cool because she got sick. She came with little stick-on chickenpox and measles and a cast for her arm and a leg and a crutch. And I just thought that was the neatest thing. And she cost $17. And my parents said, you know what? $17 is too much for a doll. And we just don't believe in that. We could make a cast and a crutch for your doll that you already have. And I said, no, I don't. I really, really, really want that doll. So they said, well, you're just going to have to earn the money for it. So I said, and how am I going to do that? And ultimately, I had a lemonade stand. And in fairness, my grandparents bought a great deal of lemonade. This is not a hardship story in any way. I was able to get the $17 very quickly, and she's still sitting upstairs because there's no way I'm giving up that doll.
Even though on eBay you could probably...
I do check her out on eBay every once in a while just to see if I want to sell her, because I would sell her for the right price.
Other than the lemonade stand, as you get a little bit older, maybe high school, something like that, did you have a first job?
Babysitting was it. And I remember I raised my rates from 50 cents an hour to 60 cents an hour because that way I was getting a penny every minute. And then I was lucky enough that I could get a lot of non-paid jobs. And so I worked at a school for disabled children, and I did some volunteer work for political campaigns. I come from a very political family. My first paid job was not until college. I had a boyfriend from high school, and he went to college in California, and I went to college in New York. So that's really far away. And we wrote each other every day. And I wanted to make enough money so I could call him. So I took a job as a receptionist at my college. And if you want to know what happened to him, he's upstairs. So
okay,
yeah,
so that worked out.
It worked out very well. But that was my first paid job, was being the receptionist at my college.
You went to Sarah Lawrence?
Yes.
Studied what?
Well, Sarah Lawrence famously does not have majors, but I would say if I did have a major, it would have been English, writing, and literature.
And you went to law school right out of
college. Yeah, it's at the University of Chicago.
Was that because your father was a lawyer?
Yes.
And was that your desire to go to law school? Was it his expectation, or was it some combination?
My father was shocked. I grew up in an era where all the moms I knew stayed home and took care of the kids. And so, I mean, the first issue of Ms. Magazine was very influential for me, the women's movement, very influential. And I remember I took a year off from Sarah Lawrence and went to Northwestern so that I could study film for a year. And my dad came with me to set my schedule with the dean. And my dad said, she's going to want to get a teaching certificate to fall back on. So what does she need to get a teaching certificate? And I said, Dad, I'm not going to fall back on anything. I'm going to have a career. And I was lucky enough in college to have 3 different teachers who were lawyers. And of course, I grew up not just with my dad, but many family members who were lawyers. And they had a way of talking about things that I wanted very much to have. It was almost like a magical skill. They had a way of arguing that was very compelling, a way of telling a story that was very compelling. And so I really wanted that. And also, having grown up in the 60s, the idea of pursuing justice was very important to me. Civil rights movement, the women's movement, the beginnings of the environmental movement, even of gay acceptance, all of that was very much at the forefront. And so it seemed to me to be an exciting thing to do. And so I went to law school.
Did you have a sense of the type of law you wanted to practice? Because I've talked to other people who went to law school in part so they would have some, it wasn't a teacher's certificate to fall back on. Right. It was, I'm going to go to law school so that if whatever else I want to do doesn't work out, I can fall back on this.
I actually won a full scholarship to law school. And in my interview, which was when I was still in college, for the final round of consideration for that scholarship, they said, have you decided what your specialty is going to be as a lawyer? And I said, no, I am going to go to law school to figure out what I want to do. They said, would you plan to practice exclusively women's lib law, is what they called it. And I said, no, but I said, I just read about a case where the only state in the country that requires a woman to change her name when she gets married is Hawaii. And they're challenging that. And that's the kind of thing I would like to get involved in. So no, I had no idea whatsoever. And to the extent that I did develop an idea, I ended up not doing it. So in my summers in law school, I worked for first the state's attorney, which is what they call a district attorney in Illinois. So I was prosecuting criminals. And I said, well, this is really great. I really like doing this. Let me try to work for the U.S. attorney in Illinois. And so I did that the next year. And the state's attorney offered me a job after I graduated, and I was perfectly happy to do that. I thought that was going to be my career. I really liked putting bad guys in jail.
Let me go back to law school for just a second, because getting a full scholarship to law school, obviously, among other things, and I'm sure that was also a nice point of validation with your father, who was surprised that you were going to law school in the first place.
Yeah.
But it also removes the burden of debt from law school. Like, how did you think about money?
Okay, that would not have been an issue. My law school tuition, my first year, was $3,000. Okay, that was a long time ago. And my husband, who had part scholarship, part student loans, those were 3% loans, student defense loans, and we paid them off very quickly after we got married. I tried to drag one of them out as long as I could because the interest was so low. But finally, I just was not going to write another $20 check. So
the student loan industrial complex hadn't gotten up to speed in terms of
it was a
raising rates.
Very, very different era. So yeah, $3,000. And I think by the time I graduated, it was like $3,500 a year.
Am I correct that both of your younger sisters are also lawyers?
Yes.
Did your father at any point blame you for that? Or did he go 180 and just start dreaming of the law firm
Absolutely.
of Minow, and Minow?
Actually, somebody printed up a stationery for him that said Minow, and Minow, Cupertino, Chicago, Cambridge, and Arlington, Virginia. Yeah, and in fact, one of the last things that we did before he died was the four of us wrote an article together that was included in a book about the First Amendment and the internet and all of that. And he was the proudest moment of his life. He loved it.
To what extent did you and your husband talk about money before you got married?
The main thing that we talked about was we had different backgrounds and different approaches. He had taken responsibility for himself, which I admired very much, paid for his own way through college and law school. So that I thought that was a real education for me. But the one thing that I really worried about was that, again, this was a long, long time ago, I was very meticulous about writing down all my checks in my check register. Not only was he not meticulous about that, he would go into the box of checks and take one out from the middle. So he didn't even know how many checks he wrote. And I said, I'm not going to divorce him. I'm going to kill him if I marry him under these circumstances. And so I said to him, we're going to continue to have separate checking accounts. I just cannot deal with the way that you do things. He said, okay, so we still have separate checking accounts.
I think that makes perfect sense.
I do too.
Even if he had the same system as you, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, well, our son got married last year, and he called me and he said, what do you think I should do about combining accounts? I said, it's an incredibly personal decision. You have to make a decision about what's right for you, talk to her, and decide together. I said, unlike us, we got married right out of law school. We were starting up our household together for the first time. You've had separate households. But I will tell you that having separate checking accounts has worked out very well for us.
Coming up, Nell talks about how she got into her career as a film critic, and it starts in the earliest days of the internet, which is a little nuts to hear about. You're not going to want to miss it. Quick question for you, though. Have you tried Marmar? It's my favorite chili garlic crunch. I've tried a bunch of them, and Marmar is the one you have to get. It is so versatile. I mix in a spoonful when I'm making pasta sauce. I spread it on bread when I'm making a sandwich. I had it this morning when I was making breakfast tacos. I'm telling you, when I first tried it, I would use it now and then. Now, it's a kitchen staple. Give me salt, pepper, and Marmar, and I'm going to be good. It has amazing flavors. You can get the original Marmar, but if you want a little more heat, get the spicy Marmar. You're going to be all set. Go to ilovemarmar.com. Get 10% off your first purchase when you use the promo code MONEY. Click the link in the show notes or go to ilovemarmar.com. Get 10% off. Use the promo code MONEY. Make your mouth happy. All right, let's get back to Nell. When does your second career in film criticism begin? And how does it begin?
Well, I had been the film critic for my high school and college papers. And as I said, I took a year at Northwestern. I took the entire undergraduate film curriculum in 1 year. Not that that was a very impressive thing to do. They didn't have that much of a curriculum, but I took everything I could. So I was always very interested in it. And I wrote a little bit here, a little bit there about movies, and then had children. And then the internet happened. And I've always been very interested in technology. And I was on the internet very, very early. I was on so early that I would type my name and people would say, "Are you a girl?" I mean, it was before the World Wide Web. I'll tell you how they verified, how other women would verify if you were a girl. There are two questions they would ask you. What's a French manicure, and what size pantyhose do you wear? Because very unlikely that men would know the answer to that. So that was the real wild, wild west. And it was mostly military, people in college. I remember the first kind of search that I did, again, before the World Wide Web, I thought, I'll see what's going on at the University of Chicago Law School. And I got like the schedule of faculty meetings. So it was it was not us and the world. It was us communicating, with our little group. Anyway, so the World Wide Web started, and I decided I wanted to have a website. And most of the websites at that time were, this is me, this is my dog, this is my coffee pot, here are my 5 other links that I like. I didn't want to do that. And I set aside 2 weeks to learn how to create a website. And I didn't realize how easy it was. I had it up and running in about 10 minutes. So I said, well, maybe I'll write some movie reviews. And I can't be Roger Ebert. I will just have to operate out of my own experience. And in those days, there were video stores. And I would go to the video stores and I would see parents looking like they were going under for the 3rd time, looking at all the movies and trying to figure out what was appropriate for kids. So I said, okay, well, I'm a mom. I know about child development and I know about movies. I'm going to start writing as the movie mom. And I got one really great piece of advice from one of the lawyers in my husband's firm who said, lock down that website name, that domain name right now. So I got moviemom.com and I started writing reviews. And that was 1995. And there was literally not one corporation or publication on the web at that time. So 5 years later, the internet had happened. Yahoo, which didn't even exist when I started, called me and said, we want you to be our critic. Not because I was so great, but because I had an archive of 500 reviews. And they could be up and running right away.
We have all this content instantly.
Yeah, exactly. And they liked the fact that it was family friendly too. And the movie part of Yahoo was the most successful part of Yahoo at that time. So it was a great place to be. And I'll tell you one story about it, which is that I was also writing a column for the Chicago Tribune at the time. And I was on the phone with my editor and he said, I got to go. I got to catch a plane. I have to go out to LA because a lot of the movie studios are cutting back on their advertising with us. And I said, okay, well, good luck with that. That afternoon, I talked to my editor at Yahoo, and he said, we are now the #1 revenue site part of Yahoo because all the movie studios are advertising with us.
The movie studios have figured out the internet exists.
It exists, and that if people are going to look at a review, they're going to want to buy a ticket or they're going to want to know where it's playing right at the same spot. And that I said to myself, well, that's a sea change. Something very big is happening here. So anyway, so when Yahoo offered me the job, happened to be when my daughter was a senior in high school. So I really had the time to take on another job. I should mention that my corporate governance job was 3 days a week. When I was offered the job initially, it was a startup. And I was pregnant with my 2nd child. And I said, I can only work 3 days a week. And they said, okay, it's a startup. That seems great. So I think they kept thinking that when my kids went to school, I would go to 5 days a week. I just never did. So I all of a sudden had room for another job. And that's when I did it.
I'm not going to ask what Yahoo was paying you or what you were making at your other job. Mm-hmm. I am curious, though, under the umbrella of time is money.
Yeah.
Which one did you enjoy more?
It took me a long time to figure this out, but every job I've ever had has really been a kind of systems analysis. In the government, I was looking at government programs and trying to find out why they didn't work. And my corporate governance job, I look at corporations, find out why they're not working the way they're supposed to, and the same thing with movies. Everybody wants it to work. And there's a tremendous similarity. Very often, I'm watching a movie and I'm just saying to myself, with a big star, and I'm saying to myself, why isn't this working? And very often the answer is a corporate governance answer. The star is also the producer. And there's nobody there to say, this needs to be better. And of course, if you have the CEO and the chair being in the same job and nobody is telling them, giving them a kind of a market test, that's not good. So it's actually very similar. And I enjoy them both very much because I really like looking at things, trying to figure out where the vulnerable points are, how they could be made better. And I love to write, and I write a lot in both. Sarah Lawrence is the world's best college for people who like to write. There are no exams. Everything is writing papers, and you're just writing papers all the time. It's a great, great place and a great training ground for somebody who likes to write.
I'm guessing the joy that you feel is the same finding an amazing movie, finding an amazing company that has excellent corporate governance, where you're just like, you just want to tell people, like, go see this movie, check out this company.
Yeah, it's actually, I haven't got any companies in that category, so it's actually more fun to find something terrible and call them on it. And with movies, of course, I'm very happy to find a good movie, but there are many more adjectives about bad things than good things, so sometimes it's more fun to write a bad review.
All right, let's move to the speed round.
Okay.
What is one thing about money that you wish you knew earlier?
There are a lot of things about money that I wish I understood now. I'll tell you, the very first investment my husband and I made, because we had just graduated from law school the year before, and by the way, in our first few years, until we had children, we saved one whole salary. That was a sort of a core agreement that we made going in. And that worked out very well for us and set up a good basis for us. So we decided we were going to make an investment. Because we had gone to law school, we read through all of the disclosures, which nobody does.
Wow.
And about 5 different places, as you know, it says you could lose all your money. And we did. And I said, they make them say that. I'm not going to take that seriously. But the lesson I should have known then was past performance is no guarantee of future performance. And probably the most important thing that I ever learned about money was from a book by Adam Smith, not the old Adam Smith, the contemporary Adam Smith. He said the money doesn't know you own it. And just because your grandfather gave you a share of stock does not mean that it's a family heirloom. And that freed me up a lot. So those are 2 things that I would love to have learned earlier, but I'm very glad I learned when I did.
What is a thing that you have bought that makes you happy?
You know, I really believe in the core of my being that you either are born a collector or you're not. And I say this as the child and the wife of collectors and the mother of collectors, but I am not. And therefore, the things that I buy that give me joy are all very, very functional things. So if I liked a book, but I would just as soon have another copy of the same book. I don't feel attached to it as a thing. So, but I'm a total sucker for gadgets. And so you know that the advertising that you get online is very much focused on what you've previously bought. And I'm constantly getting ads for gadgets. And even though I know they're targeting me, I end up going, that does look good. So I'm a big fan of like Kickstarter, and I will get things on Kickstarter and just love them. And so one thing I got on Kickstarter that I absolutely love, it's my favorite thing. It's a gadget and a clock, which is the greatest of all gadgets, is a clock. So it is a clock that gives you for every minute of the day a quote from literature that mentions that particular minute. So at 10:15, it will have a quote from a book that says at 10:15 the phone rang or whatever. And so, of course, you get a lot of mystery novels, a lot of sort of, things for people very time conscious, and mostly from the last 100, 200 years, you're not going to get ancient literature talking about something that happened at 1222. But it is super fun, and they keep updating it.
Have you ever made a purchase that you regret and you still think about it sometimes?
Yes, I certainly have made purchases that I regret, but my view on it is that I would rather make a purchase that I regret than not make a purchase that I regret. And so I figure that there's going to be some percentage between 5 and 10% that will disappoint me in some way, but that means that I'm getting the right number the rest of the time. So I'm okay with that.
What is the last thing you splurged on just for yourself?
Oh, that's a very easy answer because that was this week. And going with what I said about functions and gadgets, they don't have to be super modern, high-tech gadgets. I like gadgets of all kinds, and I love beautiful fountain pens, and I just bought a beautiful fountain pen.
What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
Oh, there are so many. I like to support ones that, obviously some cultural ones and some ones that are literacy related, but one that this is very Chicago thing. It's a French charity that for some reason has a Chicago outpost. And so I got very attached to them when I was growing up there. And it's the Little Brothers of the Poor. And they believe in bringing meals to poor people that have a lot of grace to them. So they have a linen napkin, and they bring a flower, and they bring companionship. And I just love that they do that.
I feel like you're going to have more than one answer for this. Do you have a favorite movie, TV series, or fictional character about money?
Yes, my absolute favorite, which I think I've told you before, is The Solid Gold Cadillac from 1954. If you watch the first 10 minutes, which takes place at a shareholder meeting, and just added about 10 zeros onto all the numbers, you would see that nothing has changed. A holder of 10 shares is objecting to the pay plan, which I think is $150,000 for the CEO.
Wow, this movie was made in the 50s.
And as it goes on, she ends up going to work for the IR department of the company and finds out what's going on. And so many corporate failings of the years since 1954 are reflected in this movie. And it's also a romantic comedy, so that's very, very fun. But I also like movies like The Big Short, and which I think is very accurate, very telling. The Wolf of Wall Street, all of those movies.
The last thing is a penny for your thoughts. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be about money. It can be about anything, mm-hmm. but really just some bit of advice or wisdom that you've picked up along the way that you can share with people who are listening.
I often say my favorite piece of advice is not to use the word busy. Particularly in Washington, busy is often a humble brag. But I think that people read that as I'm not interested in what you have to say. It's not important to me. And I think it deflects a lot of very important conversation. And so I found that when I dropped that word from my vocabulary, it enhanced my life a lot.
There you go. If you're looking for movie recommendations, particularly if you're wondering if something is appropriate for kids, go to moviemom.com. And if you want more information on this show, just go to moneyunpluggedpod.com. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.